Hey everybody, welcome aboard this evening's flight. For some of you it is welcome back because this is part 2 of a 3-part video series on how to operate the FlyJSim 732. For those of you that are not familiar with this airplane, it is a fantastic representation. I should even say it's its own simulation of a Boeing 737-200. It's made by a company called FlyJSim. If you wanted to search for that online, it's Fly, the letter J, and Sim, all one word. And the 732 is, as I've said, the Boeing 737-200. So it's a really cool model. And part 1 of the video series basically went through a cold and dark start. So basically what we did was, you can see the forward view right here, but this is a fully 3D cockpit here. And if we were to look up and at the overhead panel, you would see that basically all of these systems here, and if you go through the documentation, all of these systems are essentially working for the most part, and you know, you get to actually interact with all of them. And there's checklists, and I don't know about checklists necessarily, but there's the whole procedures manual that that is based off of the 737-200 FCOM, Boeing's FCOM. FCOM is FCOM is Flight Crew Operations Manual. So it's pretty much right out of that official Boeing book, but it is, you know, to the extent that this aircraft is simulated. So if you were to look at these different systems here, it's just a really cool airplane, and beautiful flight deck. And as you can see here, everything's, you know, it's modeled on it. It's just a really beautiful touch to it. It has a nice weathered look to it. I just love this airplane. I'm having a great time with it. And so anyway, I was inspired to try to make an instructional video for those that wanted to use it, you know, that might have been having some challenges going through some of the stuff, because I know I had some challenges, so I figured I'd share with you what I learned. So anyway, part 1 goes through the whole you know, procedures manual, at least up through page 40. Okay, so essentially we're beginning on page 40, and if you wanted to search for that first video, I would recommend you just do a search on FlyJSim 732 cold and dark, and in at least probably in the top 3 choices, you'll see some other good videos out there too, you know, that do it even faster than I do. I tend to talk a lot, so, but I wanted to give a lot of detail. So if you do that search, the video that's part 1 of this series is titled FlyJSim 732 737-200 flight from KBUR to KSLC in X-Plane 10 part 1 cold and dark. So that sort of can springboard us to another thing, in that this flight is taking us from Bob Hope Airport in Burbank, California, which is about 15 miles north of LAX, Los Angeles. And we're going to take this to Salt Lake City International in Utah. It's a little over a 600-mile flight, which sounds like a long ways, but, you know, in a turbojet aircraft, up at cruise altitude, going, you know, close to anywhere from 470 to 520 knots ground speed, you know, we're going to do that in around 90 minutes. Basically going to be about 90 minutes from wheels up to touching down. So really, it's going to be a fun flight, and I'm going to go through now we're basically picking up from page 40 of the supplied literature. So it comes with a few different PDFs, and one of them is titled FJS 732 Twin Jet Procedures.pdf. So that's what we're working off of right now, and again, we ended the first video on page 40. It basically had said something to the effect of, you know, call for the taxi checklist. So we're essentially pretending now that we're ready to taxi. Sweet. So anyway, if we're going to be cleared for taxi, one of the things we need to do is make sure that those around us know that we're actually heading out. Now, of course, air traffic control would know that because they told us to and we responded. By the way, if you see me rewinding time a little bit, I just like to keep it like right around dusk. I like the time of day to fly around in that time period. It's pretty cool. And also, since I don't have a computer that's powerful enough to run the HDR setting, that's, you know, basically a nice rendering setting, that HDR setting really gives you nice, beautiful night lighting in the cockpit. But mine is very basic because I can't run that setting, so I'm just going to keep it around twilight. So if you don't know how to do that, by the way, if you hit K, it rewinds it like a minute at a time. You can see the clock right over here. So you hit K and it rewinds time, and if you hit L, hit fast forward. And then I think if you hold the shift key while doing it, it goes even faster, like maybe 5 or 10 minute chunks at a time, really fast. So all right, anyway, so where are we? So yeah, we are going to have a look at our overhead panel. And as you can see right along this front row here, you have your igniters, right? These are basically like your ignition switches. And in the first video, we ended up with these on low ignition, which is the normal setting for normal flight conditions. And then you notice that the landing lights are off, the runway turn light is runway turn off lights are off, the taxi light is off, the strobes are off. Only thing that's really on right now is the position lights and the anti-collision lights. So basically what we do is you're supposed to, it's sort of like a standard across the industry basically, that when you get into the airplane and you start to power up the systems, you turn on the battery, then you turn on the position light. And the position light lets anybody that's walking around the airplane know that somebody's in the airplane and somebody's starting to turn some systems on. Then you're like running through all the items, going through the whole panel, and eventually you get to the point where you're ready to start the actual engines. So before you start the engines, you turn on the anti-collision light. And that way, anybody that is around the airplane that values their life won't stand near the engines or in a dangerous spot, and they basically stand clear. So that just tells people outside the aircraft what's going on. So we use these lights not just to help us see what's going on in front of us and allowing other airplanes to see us, but we also use the lights to help others know what we're planning to do next. So since we're given a taxi clearance, essentially we're going to turn on the taxi light. So now that the taxi light is on, anybody that is around the airplane would know, hey, that airplane's about to start rolling. Okay, anyway, now I didn't actually give you a taxi clearance yet, so let's just have a quick look at the airport diagram and where we are. And when we get to the runway, I'll kind of review. I did a little bit of a review in the first video about SkyVector and being able to pull charts. This is a Jeppesen chart, but you'll also have access to the FAA charts that you'll be able to print out for free. So we're located right now at the aircraft holding area and bypass apron. Okay, and we're going to pretend that basically they have cleared us to go from, and if I didn't say it already, we're at Bob Hope Airport. I think I said that. And we're going to Salt Lake City. Yes, I think I said all that. So anyway, we are starting over here at the bypass apron. And our clearance was, we're a United airplane, let's say. So United 576, cleared taxi runway 8, left on Alpha, right on Delta to runway 8. All right, anyway. My 71-1065 knowledge might be a little bit off at the moment, but hopefully that was close enough. So we're going to turn and taxi down Taxiway Alpha, the letter A here, and we're going to pass Alpha 2, Alpha 3, down Alpha, and then you get to Delta. Now, X-Plane's database has some sort of a glitch in it. There will be a sign that says Alpha 4, but in reality, this is Delta. So it should say Delta. When we cross over, it'll all be correct. Okay, so yeah, I think we're ready to do that. So let's take a little cruise along here then. And this is the chart that you'll end up with. Again, I'll show you when we get toward the runway, like how to print all these out. That way you can do it yourself. Okay, cool. So taxiway light is on, and everything is clear around us. Hey, you want to make sure that everything's good over there. And whoops, and over there. Whoops. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. And then down over here. So, okay, you're good. You don't have to do that. You don't want to, but kind of just have a look. Sweet. So, give a little bit of power. I've released the brake. And here we go. Alright. So here's a taxiway center line right over here. So I'm just going to jump on that taxiway center line and follow it down. Now, we're basically, in this video, we're going to follow an IFR flight. We're doing it in VMC conditions. Basically, that's visual meteorological conditions, if you're not familiar with that. but we're going to do it by instruments. You know, we navigate using the instrumentation that you use for IFR flying to get us to our destination. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, even if it's the clearest day, you're not going to see 600 miles. I mean, even if you had 600 mile visibility, you wouldn't be able to see an airport 600 miles away, let alone, you know, even 30, 40 miles away could be tough to see because everything would be really small. So, you know, that's the purpose of this exercise. We're going to, you know, get comfortable with using these instruments, how to use them on this particular simulation. So even if you're already comfortable with your own IFR flying, it'll be cool just to sort of check out how it's done on this particular aircraft if you haven't used it. Like I said, we're in X-Plane 10.35, and so if you have like X-Plane 10.31 or earlier and you're at Burbank Airport, Bob Hope Airport, you wouldn't see these buildings. Here's Alpha 2, and we're on Alpha. You see the black sign A, so the location sign. So, oops. Anyway, yeah, so the newer version of X-Plane, this version of X-Plane, I should say, is basically has the cool, you know, has some buildings on it, which is cool. Kind of nice to see some actual buildings around. Just makes it give a more lifelike appearance, of course. And we're seeing a growing number of airports with buildings and control towers populated. If you flew at earlier versions of X-Plane, excuse me, you know, you probably noticed that, yeah, it was the taxiways are starting to show up more accurately, the runways are there, but, you know, that was it. It was kind of barren, unless you, like, downloaded a whole scenery package or an airport package. But now with every release of X-Plane, they're also updating more and more of the stock, you know, airports at stock. So this one was pretty cool. I don't know exactly if it's perfectly accurate, you know, as far as the way the tower looks, but you got some cool stuff to look at. Here's Alpha 4, which is really Delta. So we're going to slow down. We're going to make this right. Okay. The other thing I'm going to try and do, and I am not an airline pilot, but I'm going to try to adopt some of the stuff that a friend of mine, who is an airline pilot, he flies for Southwest, and he flies a 737-300, 500, 700, and 800. He gave me some basic stuff that they do. I was asking him some questions. So even though this is a 737-200, we're going to base it on some of the stuff he gave me for the 737-300. I guess the main difference I would tell you about those two airplanes is that the 300 series has a flight management system, whereas this one does not. So in the 300 series, over here and here, you have these control display units that allow you to punch in all kinds of information and you know, put that into the flight management computer, and the whole system does its thing for you. And it has different engines, so the engines are different, but other than that, it has the same instrumentation, the good old round dial steam gauge you know, instrument panel that we like to refer to this as. So otherwise it's very similar in that respect. So we can use some of those numbers. They won't, you know, if anybody here that wants to provide us with some of the 737-200 performance numbers that I might throw out for the 300, by all means, share them in the comment section below. We'd love to learn from you, and people can then try to basically replicate that based on what you share. All right. Anyway, so we're holding short of runway 1533, and one of the things that my friend from Southwest told me was that before they cross any runway, whether it's active or not, even if they're not going to take off from that runway, is they'll turn on their landing lights. They'll turn on the runway turnoff lights. They'll turn on the strobes. They'll turn on the wing illumination lights, in addition to the other lights that are normally on at this phase of the flight. And the reason for that is because let's say this runway was not active, but another pilot accidentally decided to try to land on it or take off from it, and we were clear to cross it, and ATC didn't catch it, and we didn't catch it. Hopefully those lights, those extra lights on board our airplane, would allow that pilot to maybe see us in time to avoid a collision. Alright? And the same thing goes the other way around. What if we accidentally were crossing a runway that we weren't given permission to, and it was an active runway, you know, you got lost, and you were crossing a runway you shouldn't be, and at least with all the lights on, maybe somebody would see you easier, you know, and start to hit the brakes before it was too late. So anyway, cool. So we just did that. Now if we had a two-person crew, the non-flying pilot might just go ahead and shut those off while you kept taxiing. But since that's not the case here, I stopped the airplane and I'm shutting them off, because if I continued to roll while I was doing this, by the time I came back here, I would have been off into that hangar somewhere, and I didn't want that to happen. So, okay, cool, here we go. So now we're proceeding. You can see off to the right this location sign. It says Delta, so you can see how we are actually on Delta, not on Alpha 4. But, no problem. We're just proceeding along. We'll give it a little bit more power. And I have a crosswind out of the north, which is blowing from my right side, so even on taxiing, the airplane will veer a little bit. So whether or not that happens in the real airplane to this extent at this speed, I don't know. It does have a big vertical stabilizer out there, but there's been, I don't know what the latest critique is on X-Plane's ground handling. I do know that it's been a challenge for aircraft makers in the past, from what I read. And I will tell you that the FlyJSim 732, the ground handling is really nice actually compared to other airplanes I've used. So, you know, it takes a little practice. I'm using the SATEC Aviator 01. Aviator on the stick is spelled AV, the number 8, R, you know, and then dash 01. So it's a cool stick. I like it. It's basic. It has a twist grip. You know, it has a nice look to it. It's like, it looks like a fighter, you know, like something you see on like a fighter aircraft or something. But has plenty. It has 2 throttle levers, so you can, you know, fly your twin engine airplanes if you want to keep individual, you know, props going, or jet engines. And you know, good amount of switches. I think you can program up to, like, you know, definitely over 15 functions. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I used to have the SATEC X52, which was also pretty cool. I really like the throttle quadrant on it, but it ended up getting broken some years ago, and I just never replaced it. So just went with this, real basic. I don't have any rudder pedals or anything like that. Alright, we're coming up on Delta, the end of Delta here, and runway 8, so I'm just going to start slowing down. Now, you're going to see me, watch this, you know, you're supposed to stay on the center line, which I try to do. And so what I do in this airplane, since the nose wheel is behind us, I tend to keep the center line of the taxiway kind of, it almost looks like it's behind us, you know. But if we were to go out into the exterior mode, which I will in a minute, we'll probably be pretty close to being on that line. So you don't have to be that accurate, but it's kind of cool to strive for some level of accuracy. Here comes the standard hold line. So we're just going to stop right there for now. Okay. And if you notice, the brakes are jerky, and that's because I had to program in the B key for brake, you know, on the stick. Like, it's either the brake is on or it's off, you know, so it's regular brake effort. I think, I don't know how it is with rudder pedals that have toe brakes. Maybe you can, like, do like a fully variable brake like you can on a car or bicycle or motorcycle. But anyway, alright, cool. So yeah, let's have a quick look outside. And here is our beautiful 737-200, sporting the United colors, specifically the saw bass livery. I like this one a lot, mainly because growing up as a kid, that was United's colors, and going to the airport and being extremely excited for a flight on a jet, that's one, you know, one of the colors I always saw, so I was like drooling at the sight of it. So whenever I see that, it brings back those childhood memories. Anyway, cool. So basically we are at the point of, let's see, we're at runway 8, and what we'll do now is we'll take the time, even though the airplane is pretty much set up and ready to go, let's just take a quick review of the actual routing, and I'm going to give you some, what you can do is, at the end of what we're doing here, you can pause it and then print out a bunch of charts so that you can, you know, actually fly by the charts and not have to try to swap screens back and forth. You know, so I'll show you if you want to follow along. So we're going to go to our web browser that I already have open, and it's SkyVector.com. I talk about it in the first video. But again, if you haven't seen the first video and you just wanted to start right now, no problem. I'll sort of cover you for that. And I kind of have, I basically have mapped out most of the flight. Here's Burbank, California. Excuse me, drank a ton of water before. And we're following a route that's based on a departure procedure, which I'll review. And then we're going over a VOR and another VOR, and then an intersection, another VOR, another VOR, and some intersections onto an ILS approach into Salt Lake City. However, this is what we call the sectional charts, right? And this you see these tabs up here, right? So we have several different tabs that allow you to select what you want to see on the chart. So this is sectional charts. World VFR stitches all the charts for you together. Now, they're actually individual charts. For instance, if I click on Las Vegas, okay, so that's the Las Vegas coverage area, this chart. And if you were to open up a real one, if you've never seen one before, it would take up like your entire desk, and it's two-sided. You know, it's actually, you know, it's only half of the size. But what they did with SkyVector, it's fantastic. They stitched all of the charts together when you click on World VFR, and now you can see it as a whole. So that is sweet. And then you can zoom in on it with great detail, which I'll do in a minute. Now, that's for VFR pilots. We're flying IFR. So if we were to, let's say, click on World Low, now that's basically low altitude routes. And low altitude routes are called Victor Airways in the United States. And each route, I'm going to just zoom in a bit, starts with the letter V, if you're not familiar with that. All right, V394. It's like, you know, saying a Route 80, you know, Interstate Route 80. And they go from 1,200 feet above the ground, AGL, above ground level, up to, but not including, flight level 180, which is based on mean sea level, MSL. So it's basically from 1,200 AGL up to 17,999 feet MSL. And you'll notice if you look carefully at the route that I've plotted over here, if you look carefully, it's like a black line, the Victor Airway, that's going underneath the route. But then from Las Vegas VOR to this Fred intersection, which you can't even see, it doesn't say Fred there, there's no route. It's just this blank line. Well, that's because at this point we'll be actually higher than 18,000 feet. We'll be on the jet routes. So the jet routes we get to by clicking on World High. I'm going to do that. And now, check that out. Now you can see, okay, that pretty much the heart of this en route portion of the flight is following these, you know, J9, 100, and 146, and then it branches off, okay, and then it turns at Fred intersection. So the routes above 18,000 feet are sometimes totally different than below 18,000 feet. Pretty cool. Okay, but anyway, so we're going to swing on over here, and then if you look carefully now, you can see Bob, let me zoom in a little more. All right. So we have Burbank, Bob Hope Airport. All right, it's KBUR. And you notice that the route doesn't actually begin there. I didn't have it linked. Okay. And basically, what we're doing is we're going to follow a thing called a standard instrument departure, a SID. Okay. A standard instrument departure. And the standard instrument departure is going to it's a separate chart. I'm going to show you in a minute. You'll be able to print it out. And you just follow the route until you get to Daggett VOR. And then you're on the airways. Okay. And then we get to Bryce Canyon VOR. And then notice that it veers off on its own again. And that's because instead of being on the airway, J11 in this case, we're going to be on a thing called the STAR. So the SID, standard instrument departure, helped us depart from the airport and helped us transition into the en route structure. And then we're going to use a thing called a STAR to transition us from the en route structure down to an instrument approach procedure. And that STAR stands for Standard Terminal Arrival Route. So I apologize if you know all this already and you just want to know more about the airplane, but I just figured, you know, it's kind of cool to review this stuff. And for those that don't know it, you know, now you're getting something. So, and then once we hit Fairfield, we'll basically follow a procedure called an ILS approach into runway 34 right. Okay, so let's talk about how we get those charts. It's real easy. Excuse me. we're going to go to Burbank first. And if you take your mouse arrow and you right click, now I'm on a Mac. And if you're not, Windows always use right click. They always have that function, left and right click. If you are not familiar with right click on your Mac, what you basically do is, you have like a one button mouse or a touchpad. All you got to do is hold down I can't remember if it's the control or the option key. It's either one of those. You just hold that button down, and if you click on a folder or an icon, it doesn't just highlight it, but it gives you a bunch of menu choices right there on it, like right clicking on a PC, on a Windows machine. So I just programmed my lower right corner on my touchpad to right click. And on the website, like when you right click on anything that is programmed to receive that, it gives you choices. So now we have a hyperlink for Bob Hope Airport. We're going to right click on that, and then we're going to open that hyperlink in a new tab. And then you notice that this is still up. If I click anywhere on the chart, it just disappears. So I'm going to go up to the new tab, and we can see here that we have a ton of cool information about Bob Hope Airport, right? All these PDFs and everything. So the first thing I'll tell you to do is go over to the airport diagram, right click on that, and then open that in a new tab. Okay, and we'll stay on this one, scroll down to the PDFs, and it always breaks it down into the same 4 general groups: weather minimums, takeoff and alternate minimums. We don't really need that for this kind of flight. In real life we would, but we're just not going there. STARs, the standard terminal arrival route charts. Well, we're departing this airport. We're not arriving, so we don't need it. Instrument approach procedures, IAPs, we don't need those because we're taking off, not landing here. But here we are, departure procedures, okay? And you got the Van Nuys 1 and the Van Nuys 1 continued. So let's right-click on those, open a new tab, and right-click on here, open a new tab. Great. So now you have a whole bunch of tabs open. We're going to go back to the original tab that had the route, and now we're going to scroll on over until we get to Salt Lake City, Utah. Okay, and we're gonna go to the airport, and we're gonna right click on the airport and do the same thing. Right click on the airport's hyperlink, new tab. Okay, and then I'm not gonna open up the airport diagram now because that's like the last thing that we're gonna be using. So we're gonna scroll down here, and we're gonna right click on the standard terminal arrival routes that we need. Okay, so we need the Jammin 4. You got Jammin 4 and Jammin 4 continued. So we need first of all the Jammin 4, open that in a new tab, and Jammin 4 continued, open that in a new tab. And then that will ultimately, we're going to end up on the instrument approach procedure. So that's like when you're getting close to the airport, you're within like 20 miles or less, and you're going to follow a procedure that's going to like funnel you into the runway. So we're going to do the ILS or localizer runway 34 right. Now there is more than one ILS for runway 34 right in these charts. Okay, so I want you to do the first one. Well, you can do whatever you want, but basically that's what I'm going to be working off of. So we have the same information, and that's what I'm recommending. So ILS or localizer runway 34 right, open that in a new tab. And at that point, you can now come back up and right click on the airport diagram and then bring that up in a new tab. Okay, cool. So now we can go to, let's say, the third tab. You got your airport diagram, okay? And you can just go ahead and print that out. You can save it too. Keep it, put it in a folder. You know, you could, it'll save as like this weird name, 00, look at the title here. Okay, 0067ad.pdf. You know, if you want to save it as a different name, like airport diagram, KBUR, you could do that, whatever. Anyway, save that. Then we go to the next one. Now notice this happens sometimes, where, or at least for me, it won't load, so I just refresh it, and then it comes up. Sometimes you have to do it a couple of times. Okay, so we'll print this one. It's sideways, but you know, when you print it out, you can hold it straight. This is your departure procedure, the Van Nuys 1 departure, standard instrument departure, and then this is the next tab is the Van Nuys 1 departure in the text format. That gives you like the actual written instructions. It's supported by the graphical format. And then this is what we brought up before. We're going to continue past this tab, and we have the Jammin 4 arrival. So We'll print out the jamming for arrival. You can print out the next tab after that, which is the arrival description. It's pretty short, not very big at all. And then go over to the ILS or localizer 3-4 right, and you print that out. Okay, that looks scarier than it is. And then we go to the last one, which is the airport diagram for Salt Lake City, and we print that out. Cool. So go ahead and take a minute. I'll just sort of pause my talking for a second so you can pause the video. Now we can go ahead and print that out. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've either chosen not to print it out or you've resumed the video, so we're good to go. Have all our charts printed out. Now I'm going to just get out of these tabs. I don't know how much memory that actually uses, but I'm going to get out of there because I actually, for the purpose of this video demonstration, I also put them separately in, I save them, you know, as JPEGs. And that way I can sort of flip back and forth. So what I'm going to do for this flight is I'm going to just sort of highlight the area of the Enroute. And we'll make more sense of that as we fly, but basically what I'm going to have on screen is Daggett VOR, Las Vegas, Fred intersection, and Bryce Canyon. Okay? And then I'll show you another thing that I have open. Preview. So now here we have our airport diagram. This is the FAA version. This is Jeppesen. Here's the Jeppesen departure procedure, the Van Nuys 1 departure, and here's the FAA one that you printed out. And then this is the continuation of the FAA one you printed out. This is the Enroute chart made by Jeppesen, but I'm probably just going to use the one on the website, SkyVector, because it's pretty drastically different when you first look at it. Excuse me. So here is the jamming for arrival Jeppesen, and here it is for the FAA one that you printed out. Here's the text description of the arrival. Here is the ILS into 3-4 right, and you have that. So you have all the stuff set up. Okay, airport diagrams, good to go. Cool, awesome, very good. So let's see where we're at. I actually have to take some notes because sometimes I forget what I want to talk about. I don't want to skip over anything. Great. So now that we have all these printed out, let's brief the departure procedure. Okay. The departure procedure is called, and we mentioned what it was, right? This the purpose of a SID and how it transitions us into the Enroute structure. But the other primary purpose is that it gives you a set of things to work with. If you didn't have this in your possession, when you get your clearance from ATC, you would have to write all this out. So that's a lot more work for air traffic controllers and the pilot. So having this procedure, if they can just say to you, oh, you're cleared by way of the Van Nuys 1 departure, Daggett transition, okay, which is up here. Now all of this is on a chart. You can see it better than writing it out, and you know, you don't have to write that down. There's less chance of mistakes. ATC is much happier about that. So it's always good to carry these, but you just have to make sure you keep your charts current. Okay. And then the other thing too is that this whole procedure, besides getting you onto the actual routing, it helps you avoid obstacles. And that's really the most important thing, is safety. Cool. Okay. So what we did in the first video, and I'm going to just review again, is we set up the initial frequencies in the airplane to accept like this routing. So let's have a look at the airplane again. Let me rewind time. Get a little dark there. There we go. And we'll have a look down over here at our radios and comms, or basically comm radios and nav radios. We're not using any communications because we're not doing a VATSIM flight or a pilot edge flight. If you were, then you'd be using that as well. But what I am using is Nav 1 and Nav 2. Okay, so the way this works, and if you played around with, you know, any navigation unit, basically what you have is you dial in the frequency into the standby, and then you hit a button to move it over to the active. But notice that there's two knobs here, whereas your usual only has like one knob for the tuning, and then a button to switch it, you know, to flick it over to the active. Well, this is an older style radio. They didn't have that technology at the time, or at least Boeing didn't put it in at the time. So what you do is, since it's like physically dialed in here, and you can't physically just flip it with the switch over here, you see the light over here? This is the one that's active, and this is the standby. If you then want this one to be the active, you just hit the switch, and it essentially transfers the active over to this side. I don't know if that's what TFR actually means, but I kind of think of it as transferring back and forth between active and standby. Okay, so we have 113.1 active and 108.2 standby. 113.6 in the nav2 is active, and 114.5 is standby. So what the heck does that all mean? All right, if we were to look at the departure procedure again, I'll go to the FAA one that you have, right? And let's actually just quickly go through the text part, which is kind of scary, and then I'll show you how to break it down. So first of all, we're going to look at the runway that we're taking off of, runway 8. Climbing right turn to a heading at 210 degrees, all right? And then it ends in 4 dots. They all end in 4 dots. So you pick your runway and you go with whatever it is. Sometimes the procedures are more complex than this particular part that we're seeing here, but this one's relatively simple. Climbing, turn to whatever heading, okay? Then what you do is when you see these 4 dots, you then find your next sentence that begins with dots. Expect radar vector to VNY VOR/DME, thence via transition or assigned route. Okay? So it's takeoff runway 8, climbing right turn heading 210 degrees, expect radar vector to VNY VOR/DME, thence via transition or assigned route. Now, I always say to people, turn it into English. That still doesn't sound much like English to me. So first of all, thence is basically then, all right? And then the transition is whatever transition you're using. We said the Daggett transition. You're basically picking the transition that's taking you in the general direction of where you're going, if possible. So we have to go to the northeast. So that's, if you look at this, if the airport's over here, you're saying, hey, well, northeast, just go right over to Daggett. But the problem is there's a lot of mountains over here. So these turns, if you notice, they're going to turn us away from the mountains. When we take the active runway, you'll see the mountains out there. Turns you away from the mountains, gets you basically onto a positive course guidance, and then follows you, around a route and takes you safely to where you got to go. Okay? Cool. Then if you notice, if you see how it says VNY here, LAX here, okay, you got IPIHO, you got TWINE, you got VTU is Ventura, all right? You got PMD is Palmdale, 114.5. You got DAG is Daggett, right? So when we look at it over here, oops, wait, I don't want to go there. When we look at this, and you read this, it says, from over VNY VOR DME on VNY R-255 to IPIHO intersection, then LAX R-323 to TWINE intersection, then VTU R-046 to LANGE intersection, then PMD 218 to PMD VORTAC, then PMD R-067 to Ether intersection, then DAG R-238 to DAG VORTAC. Again, doesn't sound much like English. So, if we were to look at this and then sort of think about what it said again, basically it's saying this. Okay, so take off runway 8, climbing right turn to 210 degrees. Notice that it didn't say when to begin the turn. It's just climbing right turn. You might think, oh, I'll take off immediately, bank my wings. So here's the deal. If it didn't specify an altitude before the turn, then what you do is wait until you get to 400 feet above the ground before you begin the turn. So if we were to look at X-plane, at our altimeter, it says 780 feet MSL. Just round that up to 800, add 400, and we're going to begin our turn at 1,200. Okay, so that's a rule right there. 400 feet above ground level, AGL. So let's put that into our verbiage. Take off runway 8, climb through 1,200 feet, then climbing right turn to 210 degrees. Expect radar vectors to Van Nuys, VNY, Van Nuys, VOR. Then outbound on that R-255, so let's just call it radial. Then outbound in the 255 degree radial until you reach IPIHO intersection. Now, notice the word, and I'm sorry if I'm being super basic for people. IPIHO is a 5-letter name. All intersections are labeled 5-letter names, and basically an intersection is basically typically one radial intersecting another radial. So you have the 255 radial out of Van Nuys, the 323 radial out of Los Angeles on 113.6. Okay? So now let's just use that logic. Again, runway 8, climb through 1,200, climbing right turn at 210 degrees, expect radar vectors to Van Nuys VOR, outbound on the 255 radial until you intercepted 323 radial at IPIHO. Track the 323 degree radial to TWINE intersection, which is made up of the 323 radial out of Los Angeles and the 046 radial out of Ventura on 108.2. Take the 046 radial out of Ventura, because we're going to turn at TWINE, and we're going to take that to LANGE intersection. LANGE intersection is basically made up of the 046 out of Ventura and the 218 radial out of Palmdale. But we're going to fly inbound. See, radials are named in the direction that they go from the station, or come from the station. But we're going to go to the station on it. So instead of 218, we're going 180 degrees opposite. So 218 minus 180 is 038. So they give you the course there conveniently. Inbound, so at LANGE, which is actually 25 miles from Palmdale, I'm going to point that out later, 038 degrees inbound to Palmdale, 114.5. When we hit Palmdale, we're going to go outbound on the 067 radial until we get to Ether intersection, whatever you want to call that. Then at Ether, we're going to turn to a course of 058 degrees, be flying inbound on the 238 degree radial inbound to Daggett. And that'll be the end of the departure procedure. At that point, I'll then continue talking about how to tune in as we continue going. Okay? Cool. So I think we have this thing pretty well briefed. If you notice, there was no other mention of altitudes. On the takeoff minimums, it does say some altitude stuff. But that's beyond the scope of what we're doing in here. And that's all about like making sure you have certain climb performance. So we're just going to assume that our nice turbojet airplane can do it. All right? But that could be a subject to another video. Okay. So let's see. But there are no other altitudes. Oftentimes, if there is an altitude, it might say, in this sentence, climb at or above a certain altitude, whatever. Climb and maintain a certain altitude. They're not giving us that. Even on the Jeppesen version, same thing. There's nothing mentioned. Here's a Jeppesen. It's the same chart, just a different format, basically. But there's no altitude mentioned. It's just, takeoff runway 8, climbing right turn at 1200. Expect radar vectors is the Jeppesen symbol for radar vectors, these little arrowheads. To Van Nuys, outbound on the 255, intercepted 323 at IPIHO, and so on. But there's nothing mentioned in here in this table. So Jeppesen puts it all in one chart as opposed to two charts. They try to always do that. And you get like your initial climb and your routing. And usually if there's like a specific altitude they want you to do, they'll either put it here or they could also include it in the routing. Being that there is no altitude mentioned, I'm going to use the first MEA, which is called a minimum en route altitude. And in that case, it's 5,000. So basically any flyable route has to have an MEA on it. And this one is 5,000. An MEA basically guarantees obstacle clearance by at least 1,000 feet in non-mountainous and 2,000 feet in mountainous terrain. And you notice that it gives you these MEAs along each segment of the route, and they change as you go. So anyway, that's like a really important number to know when you're flying in real life. Okay. Otherwise, there's no other mention of other altitudes in here either. You can see there's an altitude restriction over at Sauna, but we're not going that way. It says at or above 3,700, so we're not going at or above 8,300, right? But nothing applies this way. Okay. All right, cool. So we're going to put 5,000 into our our altitude select window in our airplane. That's well, I already did, but basically that's why I have 5,000 in here. Okay, so we have 5,000 set there, and then we have the frequencies all set up, right? And so we have 4 frequency banks, and so let's have a look once again, just real quick. It's basically Van Nuys 113.1, 255 degree radial, right? So what I did was Van Nuys is currently tuned in 113.1, and I put it in the first heading horizontal situation indicator, right? Your 255 degrees. If you're not familiar with this instrument, it's basically a VOR indicator slapped on top of a heading indicator, HSI, horizontal situation indicator. It's a great instrument, and we tuned in, the course of 255. Okay, so we have that set. You can also see that on the left side here. This does the same thing. Watch, I can turn it, and it moves it over there as well. So whatever is easier for you to grab. Okay, then the next one is the Los Angeles 323 on 113.6. So we want 113.6, 323. So come back over here. We see that in the nav2 active 113.6, and then we can put that on here. It appears over here, right, in the nav2, the first officer's HSI. So nav1 is the captain's HSI, and nav2 is the first officer's. Okay, so I actually set up my custom views in here so that I could see both at the same time at certain times. There's other ways you can do it without seeing both. Use the RMI over here, which is really cool. I'll do some of that as well. All right, but then we might as well set in the standbys the other frequencies that we need, so that when things are going real fast, especially on this departure procedure, we are already set. So we're going to need to use, so we have 113.1 and 113.6, but then we have Ventura 108.2. We're going to need that for the 046 radial, and we're going to need Palmdale 114.5. So in the standby of nav1, I put in 108.2. In the standby of Palmdale, I put in 114.5, as you can see over here. Cool. Okay. Excellent. I think we're getting there. Let's see, what else do we have to make sure that we have ironed out? So we have the courses set, the frequencies are set, courses are set, the altitude is set, okay? And we talked about when we're going to begin our first turn. Awesome. Very cool. So now, what we also want to do is set both our flight director and also brief ourselves on how to do the autopilot, okay? And I'm going to do that now because doing that in the air and talking about it while doing it is kind of tough. So, and you yourself would like to know how to do it, before flying. And I remember the first time I used this autopilot, I was like, what the heck am I doing? And the airplane was pitching like a wild man and almost stalling. And I'm like, okay, let me disengage that. So anyway, basically what we have here these days, and I don't know if it was called this back then, but basically this whole glare shield here, right? And it's actually pretty. The first time I saw like how big this visor was, it's essentially a glare shield. But it's on the glare shield. You have what's called the MCP, mode control panel. Like I said, it might have been called something different back then. I had another friend of mine flew Gulfstreams, and on one of the airplanes he was flying, they called it a flight guidance panel. So manufacturers sometimes call it different things. But the latest terminology I'm hearing these days is MCP, mode control panel. And basically, on the left side of the mode control panel, you have your flight director, and on the right side, you have your autopilot. Okay. So what we did was in the first video, we set up. We had to deviate a little bit off of the checklist in that we had to activate the heading function on the flight director, and that allowed us to then turn the pitch command knob. Okay, so basically what happens is if we look at the attitude indicator, you have a miniature airplane, and then you have these what we call command bars. They're essentially like the wings of your airplane, and if you pitch up and bank, all right, like it's telling us to do now, it will follow whatever. Depending on the situation, in this case it's set up to follow this heading bug. Watch, if I put this straight in front of us so that we wanted to fly straight, look at the command bars. Okay, and I think I mentioned this in the first video. If you turn it to the right, it'll turn to the right. So really a handy device, all right? But then the question is, well, why is it pitched up? Why isn't it on the horizon? I mean, we are just sitting on the ground. So let me just put this back to runway heading 076. Okay, so that's what this pitch command knob does. It lets you dial in a certain degree of pitch that you want. The checklist called for full clockwise turning of that knob but I found in this simulation, unless I misinterpreted how you're supposed to set it, once you're airborne, this thing will just keep going up, like beyond 25, 30 degrees, and it will bring you into a stall, basically, or at least close to it. So I just put it right at about like the 12:30. That way it'll help me, give me something to go for as I'm taking off, okay? All right, so while we have that set, let's have a look at the autopilot. Now the autopilot you can set up to follow the flight director, but you don't have to use the flight director to work the autopilot. So, but we'll keep it relatively simple, I think. The autopilot has basically, it controls your bank with the aileron autopilot. You flip this switch, this paddle essentially, and you engage it, and this will do the aileron or your bank of the airplane. And then the elevator function will control the pitch of the airplane. So with the elevator function, you can do altitude hold, so it'll hold a specific altitude, or you can do indicated airspeed mode, where it will, if you have a certain airspeed dialed in. Now this airplane does not have an auto throttle, okay, but what it does have is a speed cursor. You see this over here, okay, right, and we got it over here in nav one side, or rather, the captain side, right? I put it at 210 for now. So basically what it will do is, when you activate the indicated airspeed mode, which we'll do shortly after takeoff, it will automatically adjust the pitch of the airplane so that it will achieve the speed. What you basically do is you set your power, let's say climb power, takeoff power, climb power. So that's a pretty high power setting, so it would make sense that it'll make the airplane climb. Well, what happens is when you hit the elevator autopilot and then you switch it to indicated airspeed mode, it will try to pitch the airplane to either slow up or speed down to the speed, and then once it's at it, it will find a pitch attitude to hold that speed. And it will do so until it reaches whatever altitude you have set in your altitude select window down here. So we're down here at the surface of the airport at just about 800 feet, and we are going to climb to 5,000. So if I use that function, it will hold this 210 knots all the way to 5,000, and then at 5,000 it will automatically level off, and it will switch over to altitude hold mode, where it will just hold the altitude. And then if I want, I could descend that way too, and we'll do that later. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to just leave it that way for now. It's useless to go on further until we actually do it, okay? Okay, so that's your pitch commands for the autopilot. The aileron, or the bank commands, you can do manual, okay? And when it's in manual mode and you choose heading select, it will follow your heading bug. However, if you were tracking a VOR radial, you can then switch it over to VOR mode and it will track the radial. So if you get pushed off by the winds to the right, the airplane's autopilot will automatically turn back to the left to get back on course. And it does a great job. And then if you put it to auto approach, it will not only follow a localizer like it can, which is the VOR mode localizer, it will actually also follow the glide slope. So we'll play with all that stuff as we go. All right, nice. So I think we have that set. Let's see, if you notice, since I have the heading function activated, and you look over here, these are the annunciator lights I should just bring your attention to. So when you use the autopilot and flight director and you turn it on, the yellow means it's armed, but you're not there yet. And the heading is basically saying, we'll basically like say that, okay, I'm engaged and I'm doing what I have to do. All right, so we'll make more sense of this when we go. So green means like you're there, yellow means you have it activated, but you're not there yet. All right, and that goes for both the autopilot and flight director. Cool. Let's see. Again, I just printed out some notes here because, what else do we have? Elevator, we talked about that. Aileron engage, we talked about that. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to pretend now that we're basically being cleared for takeoff, just about cleared for takeoff. So one of the things you would do is, and we did this during the, the cold and dark start, the procedure actually gets you to your flap setting you plan to use for the takeoff. Alright, and then it actually tells you to set your trim for takeoff. So what the pilots do is they have their pilot operating handbook, so to speak. And in there, they can look up, like, the weight of the airplane on a table. and then maybe like their flaps that they're going to use, and they know the pressure, altitude of the airport. Basically, it's like their airport elevation factored in for pressure, barometric pressure that day, and then the temperature, and maybe some other things, and probably winds as well. Actually, no, I don't know. I don't think they would factor in for trim. But anyway, so they would look in there and they would see, hey, based on these parameters, I should set. Now, if you look over here, here's your trim wheel, right? And I programmed in the trim on my flight stick on one of the switches, and I would set for my takeoff trim, because trim is extremely powerful. And if you don't have this correct trim set, you can go down the runway and be ready to take off, and you pull back on the yoke and the nose doesn't come off the ground, and that has resulted in fatal results before. So you set the correct trim, basically. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if FlyJSim supplied those materials. They might have. I can't remember. But what they also gave you is a really handy feature that you can just click anywhere on this green band and it sets your takeoff trim correctly for your weight and your flap setting and all that stuff. I believe it includes flap setting in there, which is really sweet. And then once we're flying, when we need to do some trim adjustments, then I do that myself because I just couldn't just feel it out. So, but awesome stuff, right? They were pretty smart, those guys. Not only did they make a really cool airplane, but they put in some thought to some handy features. Okay, so we have our trim is set, flaps are set. And now what we should do is, and we would have done this also basically during the whole procedure before we taxied out, but we're reviewing, I'm just going to show it to you now again in case you didn't watch the first video. You were reviewing our speed bugs, our V speeds, right? So what the pilots do is when they review the actual V speeds, like V1, which is the point of no return, VOR, or the rotation speed, which is like the speed that you now are going fast enough to pull your nose up into the air and you're rotating the aircraft up into the air and climbing out. And then V2 is your minimum safe climb out speed. We usually at least climb out at V2 plus 15 or better. So we set, one of the speed bugs is set at 80 knots, one of them is set at V1, one of them is set at V2 plus 15, and then the other one is set for the minimum speed you can be flying at without flaps. Okay, so if you would imagine, if you know anything about like aerodynamics, basically when you change your flap setting, the amount of lift needed to take off changes and the speeds change as a result. So what they did was, in real life, they would look at their performance tables and the pilots would push these little speed bugs to where they needed them so that they could just quick glance see, is this airspeed indicator needle past that point or before it. All right. Again, brilliant folks at FlyJSim. What they did was they created a V card system. It actually looks like paperwork. Here's our takeoff power setting, 97.4% N1, which is over here. N1 is over here. Okay, we're going to use that. And we could use EPR, engine pressure ratio. I don't really know how to use that, so I'm not going to use that. And then notice this. It says for flaps 2, V1 is 138. VR. If you don't know what V1 is, it's the decision, like the go or no-go speed. If you have anything fail before V1 that's serious, you can abort the takeoff. If you're at V1 or beyond, then you're committed. All right. VR, your rotation speed, it's only 1 knot difference. And then V2 is 144, and we said V2 plus 15. So 144 plus 15 is, look over here, 159. So they put that in there. Now, if we go to flaps 5, watch, I'm going to click on the 2, it'll change to 5, and these numbers will change. Okay, so there they go. And even cooler, I think, when I click on the 5 to bring it to 10, it will also, whenever you change the numbers, it changes these speed bugs, these two right here. So watch. I'm going to do 5 to 10. Here we go. Look at the speed bugs. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And it just moves them to the right positions. Cool. Awesome stuff. So, excellent. Our speed bugs are set. We know our V-speed. We're going to set our speed cursor initially to V2 plus 15. So we can just drag it back and forth. If you're not used to FlyJSim stuff, the double arrow lets you slide it back and forth. Or if it's curved, you can, like, 1 at a time clicks. one at a time, right? So I'm just going to put it like right about there. All right. What else do we have here? Cool. And then once we're airborne, we're going to then have to retract the flaps as we accelerate. Now, I don't know about you, but, you know, in airplanes, when I was not really experienced with anything, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just start retracting the flaps when I think I'm going fast enough. But that's not really the way to do it. So what we do is we're going to look again over here, and on page 43, of your procedures manual, you have a thing called a flaps retraction speed schedule. And then there's another one on like page 45, 46, or 47 that does the same thing for flaps extension. And when I first looked at this table, I'm like, what the heck do I do? What does this mean? So, first of all, we're going to use these two columns, but we're only using the left one because we're below 117,000 pounds. And we're going to use for flaps 10, since that's what we're taking off with. And how it works is it says if your flaps 10, and when you take off and you accelerate, once you get to V2 plus 15, you then go from flaps 10 to flaps 5. Okay? Then, while you're at flaps 5, right, as you continue to accelerate and you get to 170, you go to flaps 1. And then as you continue to accelerate and you go past 190, we'll go to flaps none. In other words, we bring the flaps up. And that's it. So that's how we're going to do that. We're going to try to, at least. Okay? A lot of stuff will be going on, and I might forget. Let's hope I don't, but whatever. Okay, maybe one time a touch. Cool, so we know how to use the flaps retraction schedule on page 43. And that's probably another thing you might want to print out to play around with. Okay, so if they said to you, United 576, clear for takeoff, runway 8, depart via the SID, expect contact departure on whatever the frequency was, right? And we were clear to go out on the runway. Once again, we need to tell everybody what we're doing by using our, besides giving a read back to the air traffic controllers, not everybody necessarily hears that. So we're going to turn on our landing light, our runway turn off light, our taxi light will come off because that's going to end up going up in the nose wheel anyway. Retract our gear. Strobes are coming on, and wing illumination lights are coming on. Once again, we want to make sure that we are highly visible. Okay? Very good. I think at this point, let me just look things over, make sure that we're good to go, ready for takeoff. We get our trim set. I think we're good to go. Yes, we are definitely good to go. All right, cool. So now we are just going to release our brake, make sure it's released, and we're going to roll out onto the runway. Okay. Notice that crosswind there. The winds are definitely favoring runway 33, but I like to, you know, take off with a crosswind. Sometimes it's kind of fun. It's challenging, so when I do it right, it feels kind of cool. Alright, let's get out to the center line. Now, if they had actually cleared us for takeoff from that point, we could just hit the power and go. But we're just going to sort of line up as if we were told to line up and wait runway 8. Okay. Okay, we're looking good. Everything's all lined up. Controls are neutral. Good deal. Okay. Alright. Here we go. So let's make sure that we are released. And we are advancing our power forward. We're going to like try to estimate 97%. Basically that's putting the N1 power setting right at like the yellow line essentially. Okay. Now the left wing is going to try to come up on me because there's a wind out of the north from the left. So I'll put some left
80 knots.
Yoke in there while holding right rudder to stay on center line. airplane up into the command bars right there. We have a positive rate, so landing gear is now coming up. Alright, good deal. We're going to hold this heading until we get through 1,200 feet. Okay, because you see those mountains? That's why they turn you to all those headings away from the mountains. So look at this, 210. Notice the command bars. I'm just going to try to follow them. If you want, you can zoom in, you know, make sure that you're kind of right in there. Alright, get yourself established. And then when you feel comfortable, if you want to, you can just keep following it. We can put the flat panel to neutral. I'm going to engage the aileron and the elevator autopilot. Okay, and then we are beyond V2 plus 15, so I'm going to go to flaps 5, and I'm going to put the indicated airspeed on here. And then at the same time, we're going to pretend that ATC came to us and said, United 576, turn right heading 340 degrees. Let's go ahead and put that on 340 degrees. And oh, I put this on indicated airspeed, but I didn't put the speed where we needed it. Sorry about that. So watch this. Now that I've done that, look, I put it at a higher speed, and look at the command bars went down, the airplane's pitching down, it's going to start accelerating. Okay. Cool. So 170 knots. We're going to go from flaps 5 to flaps basically 2, and then 1. Right. So 180 we'll go to flaps 1, and then 190 comes flaps none. All right. Very good then. And now our wing is clean. And now watch, as we hit the speed bug, airplane's going to start climbing again. Here's our airport we just took off from. Pretty cool. Look at those beautiful mountains out there. And we pretend ATC comes to us and says, climb United 576, climb maintain 9,000. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And now I'm going to look at the RMI. All right, watch this. We basically are going to hit, we're going to hit Van Nuys VOR and then go outbound on 255, but we're going to just pretend that they said cleared, direct, whatever. I'm going to turn it at the 270. If I waited for that CDI to come alive, by the time it did, I would way overshoot my course. So the nice thing about this RMI, radio magnetic indicator, is that it essentially points to where the VOR is at all times. Alright, and sometimes it makes you look pretty good. Let's see how it works out this time. Okay. One thing we could have done, thrust reduction height is basically, I'm going to just turn a little bit more to re-intercept this. Thrust reduction height is basically when you are 1,000 feet or higher above the elevation, you're going to pull the power back a little bit. So we're going to go to 90 knots, 90% and 1 for now. Okay. And that's because we're a little bit higher up now, everything's safe, so it's going to promote like a cruise climb performance type of situation, so to speak. And I'm going to keep it, at this point we could go to 250 knots, but because the first set of turns in this departure procedure is like downright crazy, and normally ATC would probably give us like a different modified routing, but we're going to do it the hard way, 4 miles, 6 miles, 9 miles. We're going to just keep it a little bit slow. Okay, so let me just turn a little bit to the left. You see how the CDI is going to the right? So I'm just going to turn this a little bit to the right. Okay, and we're almost at the station. I'm not going to go crazy chasing it because now it's going to get more sensitive. And again, that terrain is just gorgeous. Okay, that was the 1,000 foot altitude alert. See, we're at 8,000 and we set 9,000, so it's like, hey, you're coming up on your altitude. Now we're about to pass a station. We're going to see the RMI flip around, and this triangle is going to go behind us. Now we've officially passed Van Nuys VOR. At the same time, I'm going to start looking at the NAV2, which is the 323 degree radial. Okay, here it is coming back centered. I'm going to turn. Now here we come up at 9,000. I'm going to pull my power back to 60% just to keep us around that 210 knots-ish. Okay, and look at that. Now we have the CDI NAV2 is alive. We're enjoying some really nice cloud effects out there. That looks awesome, doesn't it? That's so cool. Gives us a feeling of speed. Okay, so now since this is like halfway, I'm going to make the turn now. I'm not going to wait for it to come centered. I probably waited a little bit too long. Let's see how we do on that. I will just, in anticipation, I waited a little too long. Instead of 323, I'm going to go to like 333, do a 10-degree intercept and see how we do. You might not even need that. At the same time, since we are now done with 255 out of Van Nuys. We're now interested in the 046 out of Ventura after the 323. So let's check that out. We have 108.2, which is Ventura. Let's go ahead and activate that. Come back up in here, and then the nav 1, we're going to turn this to 046 out of Ventura. Okay. Now, if you notice, the OBS counter went above. Well, sometimes it'll go above 360, and that's just an X-plane glitch. So you just let go of it and click it again, and it resets. All right, look, how are we doing over here? We're back on course. Let's go back to 323. There's tolerance. You know, if you were a little off, AT's not going to kill you for it, violate you for it. Look at those cool clouds. Once again, it just looks awesome. Okay, so we have CDS coming center. Let's go over to 046. I might have done it a little bit prematurely, but let's see how we do. Okay. Again, this is just such a beautiful cockpit. I love this model. It's so cool. All right. So as we're turning, let's look at what we should set up next. Oh, wait, I didn't want to do that. Well, now we're going to turn 046, and we're going to be interested in the nav 2, the 218 radial inbound 038 course. So we're going to set that. We're interested in the 25 miles. This is for LANGE, and 114.5 Palmdale. So watch this. Okay. We are doing okay on here, right? And then we're going to go over here, and we're going to activate our Palmdale frequency that we already tuned. And I'm going to eventually need it in the nav 1 also, so I might as well dial it into the standby because we're not using 113.1 anymore. And on the nav 2, I'm going to, instead of 323, we're going to put in the 038. So watch, it's going to go above 360. I let go, resets, and I just drag it over to 038. So real easy to deal with. Okay, cool. So watch this. Now that we have the frequency set, we have the course set. It's 29 miles. We got to go to 25. We're looking good on the nav 1. Okay, and we're going to pretend now that we're that we're done with those sharp turns. We're going to go to 250 knots. So I'm going to just put, for situational awareness purposes, 250 on the speed cursor. We're going to put some more power, let's say 80%. But then ATC comes to us and says, United 576, climb, maintain, flight level 320. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. 32,000 feet is flight level 320. Alright, and then once again, if I put the autopilot to indicated airspeed mode, and nothing happens, we don't start climbing. But if I add power now to 90, let's do 95%, we're higher up, it's cooler, run these engines a little harder, and safely. Look at that, now we have the climb beginning, because it's going to try and hold the speed. Hey look, 25 miles, that's the point where we begin to turn to 038. So let's put 038 on the course. Okay, so here it is, right? 038 degrees, inbound the 218 radial to Palmdale. And since that's what we're doing now, we're going to set the nav 1 to 038 Palmdale. And really from here on in, for the most part, we're going to follow the convention that nav 1 is what you're doing now, and nav 2 is what you're doing next. Okay? So we're doing pretty good. We're inbound course, 038 degrees on the nav 1. Oh wait, before we go any further, look, we climbed through 10,000 feet. No more speed restriction at 250 knots. Let's go to 300. Put that at 300. Command bar is pitched down, allowing the aircraft to start accelerating. At the same time, it's Southwest Airlines at least, they take this time to shut off the landing lights. Some airlines will do this at a higher altitude. The runway turnoff lights and the wing illumination. The rest of the flight will keep the strobes, position light, anti-collision lights on. Alright. Cool. Let me see, do I have my... Yes. Okay, cool. Excellent. So you can see for a moment like the climb is slightly stagnating, but again, that's because we're, climbing. Okay. So what's next? So, oh yes, setting up the nav 2 for what we're doing next. Nav 1 is what we're doing now, and we said that the nav 2 is what we're doing next. So we're inbound on a course of 038. Hit Palmdale, go outbound 067. So let's put 067 on the nav 2. I know this is going fast, but the great thing about the video is you can always rewind it, pause it, do whatever you rewind time a little bit. Cool. Now we're climbing. We have our 300 knots. And the nice thing about this watch, you can see your course on the Nav 1, and the Nav 2 shows you like the angle you're going to turn. When you just look at these two numbers here, right, you know, you get an idea like, okay, that's how much of a turn I got to make. But when you look at it this way, you know, between the two instruments, you do get a better idea of like what kind of an angle of a turn, and then you can anticipate things better. Okay, I'm going to turn touch to the left to recenter that needle. You really wouldn't have to, but kind of just striving for some perfection here, I guess. All right, cool. So at Palmdale, we're going to make the turn. Now, if we look, notice that we also have two blank frequency slots on the Nav 1 and the Nav 2. So what are we going to use next after Palmdale? We're going to use Daggett 113.2 over here. So we might as well dial that in the frequency slots that we're not using. 113.2 here. And 113.2 here. This one was conveniently located close to the frequency we need. Alright. How are we doing? 8 miles to go to Palmdale. Altitude is climbing through 15,000. That's 15,000 feet. Alright. And we are climbing to 32,000 feet. Pretty cool, huh? Very nice. I love the skylights in here. I don't know what they actually call these, but yeah, you know, little touches too. Like you can move these around, and so I think like in a night lighting, you can actually direct it. All right, you can grab your handlebar here. You can even hide the magnetic compass if it was annoying you. So like, let's say you didn't want that in the way. Okay, you can do that anyway. Okay, look at this. 3 miles to go to Palmdale. We're going to turn to 067. I'm not going to chase this at this point. So what we're going to do is at 2 miles... Now keep in mind that distance is based on how far you are away from the VOR, so it'll never read 0 at this altitude. It might only get to 2, and then go back up to 3. The higher you are, the more pronounced that is. There it goes. There goes 067. And then as you get better at this, you can actually start to try to anticipate, like lead the turn. Alright, and then we're going to take this and put it in 067 now, because that's what we're doing now. Okay. There we go. But that's not going to be enough. Right? We actually have to turn more than 067 to get back onto that radio. So let's go 077 for now. Right? Now at the same time, we're going to take the Nav 2 and we're going to put it on 113.2 because that's what we're doing next on the Nav 2. Come back up here and we'll check. This should come in pretty quick since we're not too far from the station. We just climbed through flight level 180, 18,000 feet, so now let's put this on 29902. Alright. And now that's coming centered. Probably waited a little too long, but let's see if we can keep it on target there. Okay, so let's check this out. We look over here, and you basically have Palmdale, 067, 15 miles to Ether, and then it's the 058. Look at this, 61 miles. I'm going to show it to you on the Jeppesen version as well. 61.2 miles. Okay? But notice on the Jeppesen version, it tells you that this VOR is a low altitude VOR. I'm going to explain what that's going to do in a second. So 113.2, 058. That should be in the nav 2, right? So 058. Oops, too much. So yeah, that's getting sensitive, so we just do 058. And then 113.2 is active. Okay. So, and 12 miles, 13 miles, 14 miles, 15 miles, right? And at that point, we can turn to a course of 058. Now watch this, though. Notice that over here, the needle is centered, but my flag, the VOR localizer flag, is not there. In other words, it means I'm receiving a valid signal. Your sim most likely, here's 15 miles, I'm going to turn 058. Your sim most likely has a VOR flag, and it might be perfectly straight, VOR flag. Okay, we both don't have DME for the NAV2. This is NAV2 DME, and here's the DME2 NAV2. Alright, let me just set this up on the NAV1 now, 058. and then I'll come back and explain. Okay, got that. And we got 113.2 coming along here. Okay, so I'm going to just slightly turn to the left. And I'll show you this neat little thing that if you want to try it, you can. Okay, so now we're inbound on the 238 radial from Daggett VOR, but we're going inbound on it, and of course it's 058. Alright, if you were to look up in like the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge and maybe even the instrument flying handbook, it would talk about VORs, and it would tell you that you have a terminal VOR whose range is like 25, max range, like guaranteed range is 25 miles, a low altitude VOR whose maximum guaranteed range is 40 miles, and a high altitude VOR who has like a whole bunch of ranges. You know, like 40 miles from 1,000 to 14,500, and then from 14,500 to 18,000 would be 100 miles, and then from 18,000 to 45,000 feet it goes to 130, and then, you know, like it gives you all this stuff, right? So X-Plane does the right thing. It's doing it by the book. Okay, but you got to think, and I'm not an expert here on this, but you got to think that when the FAA developed this procedure, they went and tested and made sure that they could receive Daggett VOR to give you this as a potential navigation route. Otherwise, they would have put a thing called a mileage breakpoint. Not a mileage breakpoint, I'm sorry. An MEA gap, where you lose the signal. And they don't have one there on either version. You don't see one there either. So, how the heck did I get it and you don't have it? No problem, I'll show you. When you go to location menu and you go to local map, and if you don't see your airplane, just center on it. Okay. And now I'm on high Enroute. I don't know if you have to be on this same thing, and we can just kind of trace to where airplane is going. Okay, and if I click on Daggett VOR in the center of it, and the compass rose comes up, and you see all this information here, and you see all this information here, okay? But if you click on edit, right, and now the left side changes, and you see the range. Now don't mess with any of this stuff except for this if you want to try it. It's not going to do anything to your sim. Just change the range to at least 65 miles. I put it to 90. All right, but you know, bump up the range so that you can get it. Now, I'll tell you right now, if you're flying along with me, it won't, when you come back, it won't work. It will only work when you quit the sim. It'll ask you to say, if you want to save the changes to the nav database, and you just say yes. And then next time you launch the sim, the Daggett VOR will have the extended range that you plugged in. The only thing is, it doesn't give me the DME out that far, so I don't know if the real one does give the DME out that far. It might not. Look, we just got DME picked up at 44, 43 miles. So now, don't worry about it. You don't have to restart the sim. Just keep flying your flight, hold the 058 course, and right around 45 miles, it'll come alive. And you'll be good to go. That's what I've been doing for like the past, few times I've flown it, until somebody online says, hey, you can edit it. There's another way to edit it as well, and that would be to open up the nav_dat file. But you have to change it to a TXT file, so you can open it up in a text editor, and then you got to find the VOR, like this big giant list of stuff, and then you make the edits in there. I've done it before in the past. I haven't done that in a long time, and I wouldn't really. I don't feel the need to do it. The DME as well. So we're good. Okay. Anyway, side lesson. So cool. So we're nearing the end. We're getting toward. We have 36 miles to go. Right. It sounds like a long way, but watch. If you look in the top left corner over here, you see how I have my speeds displayed. So I have KIAS, that's knots, indicated airspeed, and I'm doing my 298.4 knots, whatever. Then EAS is equivalent airspeed. That accounts for compression. TAS is the number that you'd be interested in. That is true airspeed, because spacing of the air molecules, as you're flying in different, as the pressure of the atmosphere changes, whether it's due to temperature, or the spacing of the air molecules. Let me just backtrack. If the spacing of the air molecules changes due to lower pressure, like what happens with higher altitudes, or warmer than standard temperatures, further apart air molecules let you go through the air faster as you register this 300 knots indicated. So even though we're indicating this 298, 299 indicated, we're truly going through the air at 444 knots. And then look at this, ground speed, KTGS, knots, true ground speed, I guess they're calling that. 490 knot ground speed. We must have a tailwind of some kind. So we're going to get, look at this, we're already now only 25 miles away. Even though we're indicating 300, we're going fast. Okay, next question. What do we do next? Once we hit Dagger VOR, what's next? So let's set that up. So now is when you go over to your Enroute section here. And what we have is Daggett VOR. We're going to do J146 from Daggett to Fred. So if you were to, oh, you know what? I forgot to bring up. I wanted to show you this. I had it on a Word file and show it to you. I kind of wrote out the writing, the routing, as if it was on a flight plan. So here's Burbank. VNY.DAG is the Van Nuys 1 departure through the Daggett transition. Then we're going J146 to Las Vegas, J146 to Fred, J11 to Bryce Canyon VOR, which marks the beginning of the Jammin 4 arrival. Well, it's the transition part of the Jammin 4 arrival to Salt Lake City International. So you can take a screenshot of that right now if you wanted to, and then just write it out if you wanted. Okay. Or rewind your video, whatever you want to do. All right, anyway, so how are we doing? 15 miles to go. That's going to come up quick. So what do we do next? So we go back over to here, and we see that at Daggett VOR, we have to make a turn to stay on J146. Okay, so we move this over. You see how it says 031? And it takes you this way. And 211 is the opposite radial, bringing you inbound, which is still, of course, 031, just going inbound. So we're going to put 031 in the nav2, and eventually that'll end up in the nav1, okay? So we should have done that a while ago, but we were talking. I was talking. There we go. So you got 031. Now you can see quite clearly, here we are on what we're doing now, and here we are on what we're doing next. This is the amount of a turn in degrees we're going to make. Okay, cool. So 031 is the next turn. And it's 8 miles. Oh, this is interesting. Look at I wish I remembered to mention this earlier. 298 knots, and it's saying Mach 0.74, 0.75. As we continue to climb to 32,000 feet, look at that turbulence. You're going to see that for a given indicated airspeed, the higher we climb, the faster the Mach indication. Okay? We'll talk about that in just a sec. Alright, so we're going to have a to from flip in a second. This arrow is pointing in the same direction as that little tiny arrow. That's a to indication. And then when we pass the VOR, and this arrow goes opposite what your HSI is set to, that's a from indication. So that marks the official passage of the station when you get the to from flip. Because the needles go kind of crazy for a minute. You can't really base it on that cone of confusion. It's when you fully have a full reversal. Alright, and then in that case we'll go to 031. Alright, we do that. 031. Okay. Cool. However, again, since we waited until we crossed, we have to turn, we have to twist the OBS here, 031, okay? But we're going to turn it a little bit more, otherwise we won't really get on that radial, so let's go to 021 for now. As you cross, if you just cross the station, a good intercept angle to use to re-intercept the new course is up to 20 degrees. Depends on the turn rate of the airplane and all that. So you don't want to go more than 20 degrees because the VORs, the radials are very tight together, and the CDI, course deviation indicator, is pretty sensitive. If you go a few miles and then nothing comes in, then you could take another 10-degree bite into the course. So here we go. Okay. Excuse me. Coming in. It's coming in nice and slow. That's fine. I usually tell people I think slow needles are good. Notice this, right? 297, 298, and it's now at Mach 0.77. We really want to maintain. This is kind of screwed up. I wish I was paying more attention. I was talking about other stuff. So what they do with Southwest Airlines in the 737-300 is that they hold the 300 knots indicated until the Mach keeps counting up and up and up, and once it hits Mach 0.76, then they climb the rest of the way by Mach at 0.76. So what I'm doing is I'm actually reducing, so I had to reduce the speed to make the airplane pitch up to slow down to Mach 0.76. This doesn't have a Mach speed cursor. So, but I'm only doing it like a few knots at a time, because if I did it like 10 knots, the airplane would launch. Okay, we're just about on course. I waited a little too long. I was distracted by my speed. This is why flying a two-person airplane with one person is always a challenge. So, but it's fun. Sure is fun. Okay, we got 1,500 feet to go. All right. So why do they fly by Mach, right? So my understanding, and some people might want to chime in addition, but basically, Mach 1, the speed of sound, as an airframe approaches the speed of sound, basically the air going around it starts to develop like shock waves. There's a lot of drag. There's shock waves that can cause turbulence. It can cause control surface issues with ailerons and elevators, Mach buffet, things like that. So what happens is basically they eventually reach a point like here. If we kept it at 300, we'd be going really fast. So the designer of the airplane has determined, you heard the altitude chime, right? That this particular airplane will fly more efficiently and smoothly, this is very simplistically put, at Mach 0.76 during the climb, because you don't want too much drag. Besides it being like harder, or like the drag, not necessarily talking about losing control of the airplane, but it's also comes down to, if you have a lot of drag, then you're burning a lot of fuel to overcome that drag. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to let the speed go until we level off at flight level 320, 32,000 feet, and then I'll pull the power back to like 80% and see how we do. Next thing is, when do we make our next turn? So while that's coming up, we'll come right back to it. I'm going to zoom in on this segment between Daggett and Vegas. So let's pull this in the middle. We'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, and we'll come back to the airplane, make sure we're okay. At 32,000 feet we are. Now let's pull the power back to, let's just try 84%-ish for now. We'll see how we do. My friend that flies for Southwest, they cruise at Mach 0.765 in the 300 series, but they have a FMS that maybe gives them a more precise readout. But let's see how we do. Okay, so we're outbound 38 miles from Daggett, right? Now the question is, when are we going to switch over from Daggett to Las Vegas? The rule of thumb, unless it's depicted on the chart, you do it at the halfway point. So if you did 12 miles from the VOR to Misson, and then from Misson to Clare is 49 miles, and then 35 miles from Clare to Vegas, you got to do some math. The chart manufacturers are nice in both the FA and Jeppesen. They give you the number in a box, 96 miles. Half of that sounds like 48 to me. So at 48 miles, we'll switch from Daggett to, we're almost there. Oh, we just lost the distance, but it was at 44, right? Now what we should have done was we should have had in the Nav2 116.9, and in the standby of Nav1 116.9. So let's just do it. You would have done this. You would have had 116.9. And the Nav2 would have been active. Okay, and then the standby would have been 116.9. Right, and then you would have seen like this. You would have seen this active. Here's 48, right? So we just got into 48, 47. Okay. We still have the CDI active, but we don't have any DME from Daggett. Okay, but since we've gone past the halfway point, then you switch from Daggett to Vegas. Come back up here. We're a little bit off course, so we can just make a slight turn. Okay. There we go. Let's see. We're still at 84%. We're holding Mach 0.77. Let's try 82%. If you don't want, you can. If you want to fly this thing at Mach 0.9, I don't care. Just showing you some numbers that I acquired from somebody that I trust. You guys might know some other numbers that are more realistic for this airplane, so please share. Okay, so we're inbound to Vegas. Okay. Then, once we hit Vegas, we're going to go outbound, because notice it says J9 100 and 146. I don't know where you live, but in my area, in Long Island, sometimes like Route 25 and Route 25A, they're two separate roads, but sometimes they'll blend together for a few miles and then they'll separate. Jet routes and Victor Airways do that all the time. So notice that at Vegas, J9 and 100 go off on their own here, and J146 goes on its lonesome. And so we need to keep in mind 054. So I'm going to put the 054 in the nav1, nav2 rather, right? So 031 inbound, we're not on course yet. I'm going to turn a little bit more to the left. Rewind time a bit. Okay, and then try 80% N1. Okay. And then on the nav2, we'll put in the 054. Okay. Notice that I keep having to turn, and I like doing this to keep me busy. I like trying to make my adjustments, but watch this. We mentioned it in the beginning. If I take the aileron portion of the autopilot and I switch the mode from manual to VOR, okay, it's going to make an adjustment, and now it's going to track the VOR for you. So, you know, if you want to go grab a sandwich, you know, go to the bathroom, talk on the phone. The nice thing about this airplane is it will still keep you busy because it won't turn the courses for you unless you're using the INS function that you can buy for like an additional $10. I don't have it. But it looks pretty cool. I've seen it demonstrated online. It is neat. It's like an old school INS. So you can plug in some waypoints and stuff. Oh, by the way, here's a good example. Check it out. So my flight director and autopilot, they're both, you know, fully engaged with the course. They're holding the altitude, so they're green. Remember how I said that they'll be yellow when they're going there and then green. So there's a good example. Okay, cool. So 23 miles to go to Vegas. And then when we get there, I'm going to switch it to manual, turn to 054, and then re-engage this part. Okay? So I'll show you how to do that. Let's see what we're doing next. We're going to go 054 out of Vegas, but then what is the next... so watch this, right? Check it out. We have Vegas. We're not using this. Vegas. We're not using this. Let's put what we need in those standbys. So what we need next after Vegas, 116.9, we're going to need Bryce Canyon, because we're going to turn onto J11, Bryce Canyon, 112.8. Okay. So we might as well put 112.8 in the standby. Both. Okay. Let's come back up here and see how we're doing. 14 miles to go. And look how nicely it's holding this for you. Okay. Wow, it's kind of weird, right? Look at this. I lost some speed down at 80%. Let's just go ahead and put that back up a little bit. Okay. Cool. Let's enjoy the view of our airplane outside. So, all of the scenery that you've seen so far in this recording is stock X-plane scenery. But there are a lot of scenery packages. Well, I don't want to say a lot, but there's a lot of scenery packages available for X-plane. And for this area, there's a few X-plane scenery packages that I've seen that are quite nice. So if you want to, like, you know, spend a few bucks, and it'll make the desert more appropriate in color, I guess, more realistic to what it actually looks like in this region of the country. I think it looks pretty cool. That's a pretty nice view. Also, I'm using everything is stock on here except for the airplane itself. So these clouds are stock. There's another. Eventually, when I get a more powerful computer, I would definitely want to buy like Sky Max, I think it's called. I've seen that. It's given me a bunch of times. I downloaded a free file called Realistic Sky Colors for X-Plane Pen. Or just do a search in xplane.org called Realistic Sky Colors in X-Plane. because I think that the sky colors at sunset look atrocious for the stock. Oh wait, here we go. Ready? Here it goes. So now we're going to, sorry about this. We're going to put this on 054, but watch, nothing happens. Okay? That's because we are in the VOR mode. So all I got to do is switch this to heading select. Heading is off. Heading select, down arrow, right? Put that there. Automatically switches to manual. And then airplane turns to the desired heading. While that's happening, right? It was a 054 was the next course. So let's go ahead and do 054 in the nav 1. See, that's a neat thing about putting it in the nav 2. It's like a situational awareness reminder. So we got 054. And since we need to keep turning, let's go ahead and put in like 064. Notice that the cockpit is bouncing around a little bit. Yours might not do this. I downloaded a thing called the Head Shake plugin. I don't have a lot of plugins, but I have the thing called the Head Shake plugin. So like when you're hitting some turbulence, like the cockpit sort of just moves around. It's kind of like a Cinema Verte, I think it's called. X-Plane has like a thing called Cinema Verte. But sometimes Cinema Verte will move when you're not even doing anything. I guess that simulates like your body would, you know, kind of make little motions here and there. But the Head Shake plugin's cool because it'll like when you touch down, it will sort of give a little jolt. And you could adjust it. I thought like the initial settings were a little bit pronounced for me, so I decided to tone it down a bit. You can do like how it acts in flight. And it also does like an engine vibration version, and that drove me nuts. That made my eyes water. I didn't even realize I had it on, and I was flying a prop plane. It was just kind of crazy. Okay, see how slow this is coming in, right? But that's okay. Slow moving needles are good. We're going fast again. What is my power? Oh, we were almost to 90%. So I have one thing about my Satec Aviator joystick. It's very sensitive on the throttles. Like you move it a little, you got to develop like a nice fine touch if you want to be precise on the throttles. But hey, we're doing good here. So pulled our power back a little bit. We're just about back on course. And now what do we do next? So we are going. So now we're basically getting back onto J146. So essentially what we did was this. We went across Las Vegas, probably like looped around, re-intercepted, and now we're like over here, and we have to go to Fred, which is 145 miles away. So that's a long leg. So I'm going to pause in a minute, and then what we'll do is we'll continue as part 3 of the video. All right. But anyway, before we do that, just to brief what's going on, basically we're going to set up in, well actually what I'll do is this. We're going to basically cut away, and then when we come back, we'll discuss the setup of, you know, what's going on next. Sound good? Okay, so let's just come back into the aircraft. Let's see how we are. 26 miles. Okay, at this time, you know, I could have done this. Again, I could have just put this. Watch this. I'm going to put it on localizer, and it's going to just turn the airplane automatically and track. Track what we need over there. Cool. Now, as good practice, I tend to put the heading bug with the course that it ultimately settles out on. You know, just so that you know like what's going on, and if something malfunctioned with one part of the autopilot, you could engage the other part. Not that this simulation would necessarily do that, but it's always a good idea to just sort of be with the airplane, even though you're using the autopilot, and it's doing a great job. All right, so 33 miles out. Look at that. Our ground speed is 519 knots. So we'll be there soon. Okay, so again, just go ahead and tune into part 3 of the video, and part 3 will basically take us through getting onto the Jammin 4 arrival, descending through the arrival, and then shooting the actual approach, roll out, and we'll come to a gate and we'll do a shutdown. Cool. So thanks a lot for tuning in to part 2 of our 3-part video series on flying the FlyJSim 732 737-200 from Bob Hope Airport to Salt Lake City.